I watched this film after a while this time. And just as a recap, for those who don't know, I think I'd like you to take us through the entire genesis of this project. That entire landscape that you talk about, where this is located, what that area really is, and what is this community that you were looking at in this project. So,
the this film is shot in Sunder Nagri, which is a part of Nagri, which came up as one of the resettlement areas during emergency. Sunder Nagri segment is where all the weavers were settled, brought in from different parts of the city where they were living in. And the film itself is actually the last of my trilogy on Delhi that looked at the city, men and masculinities. So this is the sort of the last of those three films.
and the first film being where when four friends meet again. The second one being Majma. So when four friends meet again being set in Jahangirpuri.
When four friends meet
When
again
four
is
friends-
12 years later.
Sorry, yeah, that's the follow-up one. Yeah, when four friends meet, and interestingly, like you were saying, it's actually five friends. It's the four young men coming of age plus their television, and for me, it's plus one, which is you, because you very decisively insert yourself into these narratives as somebody who's looking at them closely over a period of time with a sense of engagement. And likewise in Majma with the person selling aphrodisiac, which is a different kind of very public display of masculinity that's happening outside Jama Masjid. And here, which interestingly is a film for UNIFEM, which is the United Nations Fund for Women, and looking at masculinities through that, through the domestic, through the family space. And what's interesting for me here is that you enter a narrative that's already ongoing. It's not, you don't set it up as something that you introduce and then you develop, and then, it goes through a certain set of complications and then maybe a climax or a resolution or lack of it. You enter a narrative and then it continues over the duration of the entire film in this cyclical kind of manner, where they go through the motions of their lives of deindustrialization, lack of employment, hopelessness, and everything that's happening, with him looking for a job and forever being frustrated. And that keeps continuing until one day the film ends. So there are very definite narrative choices that are at play over here, as a documentary filmmaker, as a camera person. Is that a thought that you'd like to, go into as to how you decided that this is how you were going to shoot and this is how you were going to structure the film?
Okay. Since this is my third film of the trilogy, as I said earlier, Four Friends. See, one way in which I was approaching the project was to look at the idea of spaces. Spaces not just as sort of physical, geographical spaces, which of course plays a very important role, but spaces where one can get a certain sense of how masculinities, amongst other things, plays out. So the first film, The Four Friends Meet, was a very a space of secrets in a certain sense, a space, intimate space, which was actually, yes, located in Jahangirpuri, which is again another resettlement area. But within that, there was this sort of nowhere cocoon where the film happens. Then and once I'd done that film, and that was such a, it was such an internal sort of film, I just felt that I needed to now sort of pose some of these ideas and questions in a very public space. So that's how Majma happened, which is set in Meena Bazaar on the footsteps of Jama Masjid. So the entire film is in the market. And after that, I felt that okay, I've done one which is with these young men, which is this space of secrets. One a very public space. The obvious next stop was the family and the family space. So that's how actually I somewhere decided to work on a film on families and looking at what happens inside families in the context of these large-scale socio-economic changes that are happening. So, but what are the internal dynamics of those changes inside families? So that was the sort of rough idea with which I started the film. But I've always been very interested in the everyday, and how do you actually get the everyday into a film. And in that sense, yes, one of the ways I thought that you can give a sense of the everydays by entering at any point into into something that's happening in people's lives, and the story starts from that moment. So yes, that was part of a certain strategy.
And it takes on a history, takes on the background of the emergency and this post-emergency resettlement, which automatically marks these people as being of a certain class who can very easily be cut out of an urban space, of a city space, and then dumped on the outskirts, and then what finally happens to them. And one sequence that is particularly pertinent to me, which also contains a lot of humor and also includes you, is when that woman is trying to understand where you live. You say Gulmohar Park, and then you say South Extension, and her understanding of where that might be is anywhere from Dhola to Raja Garden to all kinds of places, where the cities that we inhabit and the places that, the characters in the film are inhabiting. It becomes a very, very telling space for me. And again, it becomes important where it places you as, somebody who's been interacting, with people in the film over a period of time, and the distance that people like us have, from, let's say, the subjects that we film. What really happened to this weaving industry over there?
See, the thing we need to understand about weavers is that although there are a huge number of weavers in this country, not everyone is very skilled, or they're not master weavers. In fact, the majority are people who used to make the everyday cloth, which is used in different ways. So whether it's a gamcha or a bed cover or something. So this actually area, Sunder Nagri, was populated mostly by weavers from this Mathura, Agra belt, and most of them were weavers who were not highly skilled weavers. When they were settled there, there was also an attempt to set up cooperatives, which would have, also help them upgrade their skills and become better weavers, and also provide regular employment. But that didn't really work out. That just collapsed. And also, of course, one has to see it in the context that certain specific changes were happening in the context of cotton and production. And this entire lot was becoming quite, not just marginalized, but quite useless and redundant as far as the commodity was concerned.
And of course, in this post liberalization and globalization world, where if you're looking at industrial outputs and mechanization, automation, and so on, so obviously employment is something that's going to fall somewhere along the way. In the context of your work, Rahul, you are somebody who started practicing in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s and stuff. And if we were to look at the history of the independent documentary in India, where being an independent filmmaker, as a documentary filmmaker, essentially meant making films about resistance, in the agitprop mode. But your film and your body of work is a move away from that. It is talking about political subjects. It is talking about histories and everything that's happening around us, to people and to cities and to ourselves. But I'm just curious as to what, how you were looking at your own practice in that larger context at that point of time as somebody working in the documentary.
Well, I did my share of agitprop films immediately after passing out from film school. So I was very much part of that sort of journey of agitprop. Plus, if you remember, the late 80s and early 90s were also the period when the video had come in a big way, and suddenly there was a lot of films that were being commissioned on certain issues, and a lot on gender actually, and that was the flavor. And so agitprop, issue-based commissioned films. So by the mid-90s, I was just so disgusted with myself that I thought I'd never make a film again. But
why so?
Because, and also seeing the films around that were being made at that point, what really started bothering me about my own film and other films that we're seeing was that people were being instrumentalized. Their existence in the film was only to be able to justify the political stand actually of the filmmaker, and independent of that, they had no being
or agency,
and which was very disturbing actually, because I do think that the documentary form is really one art form which really has the maximum capacity of humanizing people, and to see the exact opposite of actually demonizing people as heroes or villains or whatever, or heroines, that was very disturbing. So I needed to either stop making films or rethink what I wanted to. So this film really came out of that process also of can I still do films which are political, certainly, but allow people to be themselves with all their grays, blacks and whites, and to be human.
I've myself had a great discomfort with either films or, let's say, the thought of myself demonizing somebody on screen. And what's interesting here in your film is that, let's say, the righteous anger of the agitprop character or the agitprop film is replaced by a sense of almost hopeless and cynical resignation in this case. In the characters, you go about your life, you do what you have to, but especially the kind of resignation that, the male character has, who goes to Roorkee and comes back. And it's the women who are going about running the house and doing the things and looking after the kids and so on, It's a very definite shift of mode from that very stridently looking forward and upward, of let's say, ideology, to something which says, okay, we are here and we don't really know where we're going from here. And the film trails off it at that point of time. Is there something you'd like to say about that shift in the way the characters are looking at themselves in the film?
See, the issue is very clear as far as I am concerned. See, as far as ideological positioning is concerned, both for the left and the right, the future is always ahead. It's got nothing to do with the present ever. Everything is rosy in the future. So as a filmmaker, either you buy into that, and you also start peddling that आगे सब कुछ अच्छा होगा, अभी struggle करो. So and so I just wanted to to actually talk about the present and what what the life is like at this point, at this moment, and does that show any possibility of a future, and or what kind of a future? So that those were questions that were both political and for the form as well as my own politics that I was struggling with and trying to work through in my films. Of course, my last film is in a way going back to hardcore politics on Maruti struggle. But we need to really, as if we are true to our form and our art, then we need to constantly, I think, question what through our films, the politics that we are part of.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, what were the conversations that you had, let's say, with Reena, about the structure and the edit of the film? Because it has a certain pace, it has a certain way of looking at things. You hardly ever use an establishing shot, and you're with the characters, throughout, and things are playing out, whether it's with the kids or, with the men or the women, or the weavers going about, whether it's drinking or playing cards or hanging around or working. In that regard, it's not something that, follows, let's say, a predictable kind of documentary structure. And I'm sure you had conversations with Reena about the edit. So do you want to recall some of those?
Yeah, see, because I shoot mostly in and around Delhi, so I have the luxury of showing Reena, who's been my long-standing editor, my material as it starts coming in. So which is very useful, because then these conversations with her start very early, rather than at a point when the filming is either over or very little of it is left. And one of the first things that she said when she started seeing the initial material, see the film, I started shooting the first scene of the film when Bal Krishan has lost his job, is my first day of shoot actually. So the film gets in right into, from that point, even in the edit. And she looked at that initial material and said that, look, this is looking like we need to edit it as fiction, as a fiction film. In the sense of the editing technique, which I didn't fully understand, but I thought it sounded very good. So I kind of started thinking more about it and working on it. And then, so that really helped me with my shoot. And one thing sort of very great about Reena is that, and one thing that she's drilled into my head is how to get into a scene. And she's a great one for getting right into the scene rather than wasting too much time setting it up and all kinds of other things. So those conversations were really useful. And also the thing that, because I've worked for so long with Reena, I really think that, I was saying that in Bangalore also, that my films, if they are watchable, they're watchable largely because of Reena. And I think that's a credit that she really deserves, because she's very critical to my films.
So, just one last observation. I mean, watching the film the third time, especially this time when it opened, the thing that I registered was that you start with this man really using foul language at the very opening of the film, and you don't subtitle that. So I was wondering why that particular instance of entering the film where the characters are introduced using these very hardcore galis. I mean, I'm glad it's not subtitled.
Actually, really don't know. I mean, I can't remember now whether it was strategy or. But now that you're saying yes, I really don't recall now. It's so long back. But why I didn't subtitle it? Maybe because it was uniform, I didn't subtitle it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just an observation. So I think we could take comments, observations, or questions at this point.
My question is very basic. How do you get into the space of the people you are making a film on? I mean, they are quarreling in front of the camera, in front of you. They are drinking and singing songs. How do you make them comfortable, and how do you enter their space?
See, it may sound very difficult, but it isn't actually. There are two issues I think very critical. See, one is that in any film project, when you're working with people, there is, and people are part of a project, they have their own agenda of being part of a project. As to why they want to be part of a project and what they want to sort of say by being part of the project. So one is that are you able to somewhere recognize why people are part of that project and give a space for people to actually follow their own narratives, to build their own narratives in a film. I think that is a very important issue of not all documentary, because documentary also has so many forms, but this form of documentary, that is very important. That do people have the space to build their own narrative in a film? So I think that is one sort of thing which you have to keep in mind. The other is that if I were to start filming with you today, you would immediately be very conscious of what you should do for the camera. And if and you will expect me to keep telling you to do this, sit down, walk, go and do this, go and do that. I will film you while you're doing all that. Suppose I don't tell you anything. And what will you actually, the first thing that you'll feel is extreme anxiety, because you want actually to be directed, but after some time that anxiety settles down, and then you start going about your sort of everyday. It's not that the performance stops, the performance and the performativity remains. It's not that you ever become unconscious of the camera, but you start digging into your own life experiences for that performance. So what ultimately happens is that people start performing their own everyday. So it's a way of trying to reach the everyday. The presence of the camera is always going to disturb that. But what is the strategy that is going to enable that everyday to unfold? That's the strategy I follow. So I give absolutely no suggestions as to what people should do. And now you can fall flat on your face also, and I've also fallen flat on my face for a long time. You can spend, you don't get material which is worth making a film. So that's a risk, but that's the way I work, and that's the way this unfolds. I think I shot over a period of 1 year. 1 year, I think, yeah, 1 year. But then I also, towards the latter part of that, I started editing, because I was shooting in Delhi. My editor is in Delhi, so we started working on the edit quite early.
This was Betacam?
This was DV.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this film. I really enjoyed it. It's really beautiful. Really, really beautiful. And the most I enjoyed, it's your empathy with your characters. And I really had the impression, how you mentioned now, but I understood it through your film, that you are in a continuous conversation with your characters. I mean, it's absolutely obvious that you are not giving them, you have to do this, you have to do that. So it is flow from their inside. So there is a relationship there between you and your characters, which is really amazing. It is empathic. The way you look to that characters is the way the characters look to you. So it's amazing. It's most that I liked. It's artistic. It's documentary, and it's everything. So I wanted to ask you how was received the film when it was released in 2003 in India, and how was received in Europe or whatever. abroad, you presented it. From the point of view of the politics you mentioned, because the most amazing thing of this film, I think it's exactly this way you move between empathy and politics, which is not so common.
Thank you. So it was received quite well, both in India as well as in the film festival circuit. It won a few prizes also. So, the interesting thing was that, see, I came out of a film school which had zero teaching. So I didn't know what actually filmmaking was all about when we passed out. We learned by making films. And when some of this and the two films before that, I by this time I'd started actually by this film. By the time I made this film, I was thinking more and more around my form. But with the earlier two films, it was more sort of instinctual, and it was. And when those films started going to the festival, I suddenly sort of, found myself in festivals also which had an emphasis around observational cinema. And so the funny part is that I was told that I'm an observational filmmaker, not because I chose that thing very consciously, but because the film festivals told me that you fit in that slot. So that's why actually I rebel against it, and I keep breaking it in, even in City Beautiful with that conversation. So it's not, I don't want to be a purist.
It's a wonderful movie, documentary, of course. My one query is that it was shot in 2003. Now we have gone a long way, and you used a different camera. Now, what do you feel these days if someone uses a smartphone? Will be the characters will be more comfortable with such a, camera? If the movie is made in with smartphone.
I don't think that makes any difference really. It's it's the relationship between the filmmaker and the subject that is the more important part. Even with this film, actually, it seems as if it's some small DV cam camcorder, but you don't see the boom with the mic, which is always hanging around people's head, which is also there right through this film. Even in those small sort of rooms and spaces, the boom's been there right through. So I work, and at least I feel that in India, without a sound recorder, it's disastrous. So because of just so much of ambient sound. So it's, even if it's whichever camera you work with, the fact of the matter is that ultimately it's for this kind of film, I'm saying it's got to be about actually your relationship with with the people you're working with, and what they are making out of you and what you're making out of their lives. I think that chemistry is much more important than the technology.
Thank you.
No, and I agree with you. And I'd just like to add to that I think in many ways people have become a lot more aware, a lot more comfortable with the presence of the camera all around. You're shooting each other, you're shooting yourselves, you're performing yourselves. And what Rahul said about people performing an everyday reality for the camera. Yes, you need to finally get out of people what might work for your film, whether you're using a big broadcast camera or you're using a cell phone. What can also happen is that because the cell phone maybe brings about a certain different kind of performativity, where people who are used to, let's say, performing to TikTok videos or something which play out in a certain duration, which are meant to be performative, entertaining, ridiculous, whatever, and that's what's happening. The other thing that also happens with the documentary, and it's my experience, is that the moment you start talking to people on camera now, they've gotten used to the idea of the soundbite from television news. So the entire pitch goes 100 times higher than we would, normally use while talking, because you think you're going to be on television or on film or something, and they just start talking much louder. And in that kind of using that kind of language. So those are the kind of things that we forever have to be aware of and work around. So we'll close this discussion here. Thank you all. Thanks a lot.